All right, everybody, could you please start finding your seats? We're about to get started. So today we're going to have a 75-minute long panel with 3 amazing speakers that we're lucky to have. The title is Combat Resilience Through and Out of the Fight, and I think you'll all get a lot out of this. I'm going to read each of their introductions, and then they're going to come take a seat, and each of them is going to give a 10-minute long, just quick story of their career and resilience and leadership, and then we'll have a quick discussion and open up whatever time remains to questions. Commander Ledford graduated from the United States Naval Academy, Annapolis, Maryland in 1995 with a Bachelor of Science in Ocean Engineering and minor in Spanish. He also attended the Naval War College in 2009 with a Master's in International Relations with a specialty in irregular warfare. We received the President's Honor Graduate Award. Additionally, he earned a Ph.D. in Sociology from Princeton in 2017. His first deployment as an infantry officer in the Marine Corps brought him to Okinawa in 1996. After several other assignments, in 1999, he received the inter-service transfer to the United States Navy with orders to basic underwater demolition/SEAL training, class of 226 in Coronado, California. After graduation, he was assigned to SEAL Delivery Vehicle Team 2 in Little Creek, Virginia, as a SEAL Delivery Vehicle Platoon Commander with subsequent deployment to Rota, Spain in 2001. In November 2001, he received orders as one of the first officers and pre-commissioned SEAL Team 7 in San Diego, California. As a plank owner, he helped stand up a team through its commissioning and its first operation officer and eventually a SEAL Platoon Commander. He subsequently deployed to Baghdad, then Al-Assad, Iraq in 2003 and 2004. Following his return in mid-2004, Commander Ledford received orders to SEAL Delivery Vehicle Team 1, assigned as a co-pilot of Navy's $1 billion prototype Advanced SEAL Delivery Vehicle System in 2006. Since then, Commander Ledford has had countless responsibilities, bringing him to the southern Philippines, Afghanistan, Iraq, and other places across the world. In 2013, Commander Ledford was selected as a permanent military instructor at the Naval Academy with follow-on assignments where he is now serving as the chair of leadership, ethics, and law. He teaches the United States Naval Academy's core leadership course and military ethics. Commander Ledford's research is focused on resilience, grit, hardiness, mindfulness, with publications in academic psychology, medical, and leadership journals. He has a recent book, Saltwater Leadership, co-authored with Vice Admiral Mustin, Rear Admiral Ray, and Riama Leclerc. And I can just say that Commander Ledford has a really strong mentorship presence here at the Naval Academy. He's made a lot of initiatives, not just within his classes to mentor students, but also something we all know and love called Late Night with Luce, where he brings on speakers and has discussions from like with Matthew McConaughey to Jocko. And so we've all loved that, and I appreciate the efforts that Commander Ledford has made to forward our development just outside of his responsibilities. The next speaker is Major Katie Cook. Katie Cook is from Savannah Park, Maryland, and graduated from W.T. Woodson High School in Fairfax, Virginia in 2004. She attended the United States Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland, and graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Political Science in 2008. She continued her education at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C., and graduated with a Master's of Art in International Security in 2009. In the summer of that year, Katie reported to the Basic School, TBS, at Marine Corps Base Quantico, Virginia. She then reported to Naval Air Station Pensacola, Florida, for aviation indoctrination in 2009. Katie joined the U.S. Navy Blue Angels in September 2014 as the first ever female pilot in history of the famed Demonstration Squadron. She served as the aviation safety officer, followed by officer in charge of the C-130, affectionately known as Fat Albert. During her time in the fleet, Katie has accumulated more than 1,400 flight hours, including 400 in combat. She has flown all over the world. Most notably, she assisted with the evacuation of the USMC in South Jordan in January of 2014. Her decorations include 2 Meritorious Service Medals, 5 Air Medals, and the Navy and Marine Corps Achievement Medal with various personal union awards. In 2019, Katie transitioned to the Marine Corps Reserve and currently works as the Director of Sales Strategy of the Global Public Sector for Salesforce. Katie is married to another Blue Angel alumni, Major Dusty Cook, U.S. Marine Corps. They have 3 children. Thank you so much for making the journey today. And our third panelist is Major Dave Emison, a Marine Corps officer, infantry officer who currently serves at the United States Naval Academy as a leadership instructor, leadership mentor for the wrestling team, deputy training officer, 9th in Company Marine mentor. As a leadership instructor, he has 3 distinct courses: Introduction to Leadership, Leadership Theory and Applications, and Code of the Warrior. He also serves as a guest lecturer in Law and Ethics. The history of counterinsurgency, guest lecturer in Law and Ethics, the history of the counterinsurgency, the Gettysburg Leadership Encounter, and multiple other high-profile engagements. In his first few years in the Marine Corps, he deployed to combat zones in Afghanistan multiple times, where he served as platoon commander for the largest invasion of the war, and was promoted to the battalion's current operations officer. He earned an undergraduate degree from George Mason University in criminal justice, while competing as a nationally ranked wrestler and 3-time captain of a Division I team. He additionally earned 2 NCAA nominations for Academic All-American. Dave earned a master's in organizational leadership from Colorado State University in 2015 while on active duty. His various awards and decorations include Purple Heart Medal, Navy Marine Corps Commendation Medal, awarded 2 times, Navy and Marine Corps Achievement Medal, and Combat Action Ribbon. Dave is an avid fitness enthusiast, finishing as high as 51st in the world in CrossFit Open in 2021, and is happiest spending time with his family, shooting his bow, and drinking around with his boat. Dave is married to his wife, Teresa, for 14 years, and they have 3 children together: Leonidas, who's 13, Delaney, who's 11, and Mary, who's 7. And I could say that Major Emison has also made a big impact, even just personally. I was in his leadership course in mentoring and bringing up future Naval and Marine Corps officers. So a big thank you to Major Emison, and please join me in welcoming all of our panelists. So as I mentioned, the first portion of this is going to be about 10 minutes from each speaker, just for them to give a little background and talk about leadership and resilience and whatever else they want to talk about during their 10 minutes. I'm thinking we can work left to right. So, Commander Ledford, would you mind starting?
Yeah, thank you so much, Kyle. I really appreciate the introduction and definitely the invitation for the Naval Academy Leadership Conference. It's an awesome venue, and we're really lucky to be able to host it in this facility on the campus. So for me, it started really at the Naval Academy. I wanted to go SEALs while I was here. I came here in 1991. I graduated in 95. And while I was here, SEALs is all I wanted to do. I went to dive school while I was here. I went to jump school. I gave up my summers to go to both of those schools. And got my gold wings while I was here, minored in a language, did everything I could to make myself the best candidate possible, and I didn't get a spot. There were 16 spots for SEALs from the Naval Academy, and I wasn't one of them. And so my first experience really kind of getting knocked down was not getting SEALs for service assignment back then. And it was just not in me to do anything else that the Navy had to offer. So I went to the Marine Corps and I went infantry. And those years were hard years. I loved it, and looking back now, I was very fortunate to have had that experience. The Marine Corps, I don't think anyone does junior officer training better than the Marine Corps in any service, in any community, hands down. And I was extremely fortunate to have that background with the Marine Corps. I did 4 years in the Marine Corps, and then I was able to transfer to the SEAL teams from there. But that experience from getting that first shock when I was a senior here at the Naval Academy and realizing I wasn't going to go SEALs and that I was going to have to take this alternate path, that was kind of my first experience with this. And I think the Commandant mentioned that it's something that happens in a series. Resilience is not just a one-trick pony. It's something that happens to you over and over again. I think everyone in this room will experience that through their lives. You'll see this come to fruition, that over and over again, you're going to get knocked down. And it is about how you stand back up again and get back on the horse. For myself, that meant turning the page and realizing, okay, I'm going Marine Corps, and really getting behind it. And that was a very hard thing for me to do at first. I love my Marine Corps experience, and I would never take it back in a million years. But it was a very hard thing for me to do, going down to the basic school, realizing this is now my new course in life. So from that experience onward, I think the hard experiences in the infantry, for me, definitely shaped me along the way as well. And then finally, when I had an opportunity to put in a package to transfer to the SEAL teams, I did. And the experiences, the adversity, the hardship, it didn't stop. It just only, it continued more and more. But I will say, going through BUDS, that was probably one of the hardest experiences of my life. And everyone going into SEAL training understands that it's going to be hard. My class, we started with roughly around 200 folks at the beginning, and it's a 6-month course. And by the end, we had 16. 16 of us were left over of the original 200. And you know that going into the course, and you're looking around at some fantastic, amazing, strong individuals, and you're thinking, holy cow, am I going to be one of the last ones standing of this group? It seems pretty daunting. But fortunately, the experiences that I had up to that point through my Marine Corps time, I honestly believe that is what got me through. And I look back many times and think, if I'd gotten my spot directly out of the Naval Academy, would I have done well, just as well in the SEAL teams? And I really don't think so. I think that adversity that I had to overcome, and even though it was, I would say, probably the worst day of my life here at the Naval Academy, is finding out that I wasn't going to get, the dream job that I wanted. That is, looking back at it now, that's exactly how it should have happened, because that's what got me through, in the end, through BUDS and through that SEAL training. My experiences after that point, going into the SEAL teams, were very difficult. And I will say, one connection point with this that I've learned through the years, through my experience, both in the field with the Marine Corps, in the SEAL teams, and then also on the academic side, the resilience and the mental fortitude and toughness that it took to get through the infantry, to get through the basic school, the infantry officer course, and through BUDS. That same mentality and that spirit is exactly what it took for me to get my Ph.D. at Princeton. Sitting at a desk for, after you do 2 years basically of classes, you take your general exams that qualifies you at that point to write your dissertation. And then at that point, you do your dissertation. In my field, at least in sociology, that dissertation can take 4 to 6 to 8 years. There are people who take that long. And sitting, at a desk, just doing research and writing, that pretty much took the same kind of perseverance and overcoming adversity, in a very academic sense, but is the same kind of thing that I experienced in BUDS or in the infantry. So overcoming this and being able to exercise, this aspect of your life is really going to carry you forward with any experience that you have later on in life. And it's something that I experienced in the Marine Corps as well as in the SEAL teams, and definitely experience the same thing academically now. Cool.
Thank you. Major Emison?
Check. Good. All right. Thanks, Kyle. Appreciate it. So my journey started, I guess, kind of after college wrestling. I didn't finish my NCAA career kind of the way I wanted to, and that started to weigh heavily on me. And I wanted to test myself. I wanted to see what I was really capable of, and I had failed quite a few times as a wrestler, as a leader, and I wanted to get better at that. And I grew up in Stafford, Virginia, which is right next to Quantico, so all of the really severely intimidating male figures that I had in my life growing up, like specifically most of my girlfriend's fathers were all Marine officers. So that helped shape a little bit of who I wanted to be when I grew up, and that was one direction I went that was the direction I went. And after wrestling, and I realized I wasn't going to do that for the rest of my life, I started thinking about what was going to come next, and the Marine Corps was the way to go for me. I did not go here. I went, like we talked about in the intro, to George Mason, and they don't have a Marine Corps ROTC program, so I just did OCS in the summers, and it was odd. It obviously gets you where you need to go, but it's a different program for being fully immersed in this like you are, and it builds different muscles. And I think working in my experience with the wrestling team here, that builds different muscles too, but that's a separate conversation. And I mean mental muscles in terms of resilience and working with others and playing nice with others as well. It's not quite where it needs to be all the time. But when I got to TBS, that was when I really faced my first difficult challenge. When you get to TBS and they tell you it's a big boy, big girl school, and your time is kind of your own, and your rules, like the rules are a little bit different. I quickly learned that was not the case. All the things you guys do here with waiting on the word and not knowing what's going on, that's what it was like at TBS. And I had a wife and a newborn kid at home, and that made it a little bit challenging. That's one of my leadership lessons that I'll get to eventually. Don't say you're on the way until you're in the car. That changes things. But when I realized what this was really going to be like, I mean, when I got to TBS, it was 2007. No, I'm sorry, 2008 is when I checked in. We started Bravo Company in January 2009, and we were in full swing in both Iraq and Afghanistan at that point. And here's what I'll tell you. January in Virginia, it's hit or miss. It's either really, really bad or it's not too bad. It's very similar to how it is here, and for the last couple of days it's been 17 degrees. It's not fun. When I was a D1 wrestler, I wrestled 133, and I'm about 170 pounds right now. So I wasn't that much leaving college, but I was cutting a lot of weight to make 133. I've been through multiple combat deployments. I haven't watched my wife raise 3 kids. I've helped, for sure, but she's done a lot of the heavy lift. So there's been a lot of really adverse situations in my life. Range week at TBS was the hardest thing I've ever done. It's 3 miles out, and it sleeted the whole way. It was awful. And this was back in the old day when we were only shooting on iron sights, and now everybody who goes to TBS gets to use an ACOG and a scoped weapon, which, separate discussion, which as an infantry officer, I have great umbrage, or I take great umbrage. But either way, it sleeted, and laying in a puddle at 500 yards and like you're just waiting for that rifle to go off and having no idea where that round went, but you still have to qualify. Like these badges you wear on your chest, and just like all the midshipmen in the audience here who want to go to jump school means almost nothing for you, but the piece of flair for your uniform does. Like what you show up to the fleet with in terms of a shooting badge matters. At least it does for us. In a second lieutenant's mind, I have no idea what the enlisted folks think, but when you show up there, but it mattered to us. We wanted to shoot well, and dealing with that kind of cold weather and adversity, that sucked a little bit. But that was the first time I really got confronted with, hey, maybe you're not as tough as you think you are, because you leave being a Division I wrestler and you think you're invincible. And Commander Ledford has talked about this often, that the target audience for joining the military are people in your age group, specifically because you do think you are invincible. And it's really not the case, but you will lean on that very heavily over the course of your life. But when I started that process, I realized, one, I wasn't as resilient as I thought I should be, and I certainly didn't think I was as mature as I thought I should be, because I think those two things are tied very closely together. But I quickly learned that TBS, IOC, raising a young kid, being married, all those things start to build muscles that develop resilience for you. And I needed it, and I didn't realize how much I was going to need it until I actually got out the door for my first deployment. So my first workup as a platoon commander with 1-6, I was with Alpha Company. We were the Helo Company, and we were getting initially worked up for going to Iraq. And somewhere in the middle of that workup, we got shifted to Afghanistan. We weren't really sure where. And then when President Obama made that decision to surge, it was, I think, 30,000 troops into Afghanistan. We were on the cutting edge of that. So December 22nd, we all picked up and took off. The president took a couple weeks to figure out what he was going to do. And then my wife was always very grateful that he decided to move us out 3 days before Christmas. And as we left, which is fine, she was fine. She's way more resilient than I am, but just dragged the Christmas tree to the sidewalk, dumped it off, and then went to her mom's house. As we're getting out the door, we land in all the various countries, and we get to Dwyer, and we start getting worked up for what's going to be the largest invasion of the Afghan war up to that point, into Marja, Afghanistan. Marja was a Taliban stronghold for what is essentially their cash crop, which was opium, or the poppies. I don't think opium doesn't grow. It would probably be a lot more lucrative if it did. But poppies, they grow the poppies and they harvest it from that. So there were no other crops. There weren't any really other crops there except for these poppies, and that's where they make all of their cash. So that was what we decided to target. And there's no shortage. There's a litany of resources out there about why that decision was made the way it was, and we were going after their cash. Marja was an interesting spot. It was very difficult, and what we decided to do, I say we like I was any part of the decision-making process. I was a platoon commander. I was a small wheel in a very large machine. When I heard what we were going to do, essentially it was go to the southeast portion of Marja, pick as many fights as we possibly could to make the Taliban think that's the way we were coming in, and then land in helicopters in the middle of the night behind them. So the first initial part of that deployment was just being in the southeastern portion of Marja and going out and picking gunfights every day. By the time we actually did the real invasion, everybody in my platoon had been in a gunfight, and I had already been wounded. I was the only one in my platoon up to that point to get a Purple Heart. They say lead from the front. I don't think that's what they mean, but it did help build a little bit of resilience for me. But when we got there was a small unit on the ground there who was populated by an artillery company who had been stood up as provisional infantry. That's why the artillery calls himself the king of battle, because they hardly ever shoot artillery and they do all the other things. If the Don's listening, I'm sure he's going to be really happy about that, as he's an artillery officer, but it is true. They weren't shooting a lot of artillery there, so they made them infantry. And man, they were really good infantry Marines, because most infantry Marines, they show up and they're like, I got this. But the artillery guys, like, you're going to be infantry. It's like, oh, is there a book on this? Like, and they actually read the publications. They read all these doctrinal pieces that the Marine Corps has written over the last 20 years, and they're good infantry Marines. The unit I turned over with was, I believe, 310, and the Marine I was working with was named Sergeant Urbeck. And I'm going to tell just a real quick story to show you guys how quickly I was confronted with the fact that I wasn't sure I was ready, but like it really didn't matter. You kind of just got to jump. You got to pull the trigger. So our first time leaving the wire was actually when I got hit, when I got hurt. My Purple Hearts for traumatic brain injuries, because my vehicle was blown up, and then I was outside of my vehicle when another one went off. And my wife had called me a week before that to tell me she was pregnant with our second kid. So the stakes were high. This was literally the first patrol in a 7-month deployment, and doing this turnover with Sergeant Urbeck, who had he had just won a Bronze Star with a V for saving a Sergeant Major's life. Sergeant Major stepped on an IED, lost both of his legs, almost bled out. Sergeant Urbeck saved his life and directed the firefight that was taking place. It was a complex ambush. He was a really, really impressive human being, sergeant, doing what was essentially a platoon commander's job. We get there, we're driving around, my vehicle gets hit, and it's a 80-pound IED that goes off underneath my seat. It was a very big vehicle, but it still rattles your noodle a little bit, and it was weird. Time kind of slowed down for me. As I was like staring at blue sky because my vehicle had lifted off the ground, there was a moment where I thought to myself, like, I think I just got blown up. Like it was weird. Time slowed down for me a little bit. Vehicle came down. Sergeant Urbeck had EOD sweep a clear lane between my vehicle and his, and essentially like with flags in the ground. Like, this is clear to walk, because they used a metal detector to see what was in the ground, and they said this is a good spot. We talked for a little bit. We're walking around a little bit outside of the vehicles after they had been cleared, and as he goes to walk back to his vehicle from halfway the distance between me and this front row, he stepped on another 80-pounder, and it killed him instantly. And we spent the rest of the day, police calling this young man who was a war hero, and then realizing we had 6 months left in a deployment, and we hadn't even started the real operation yet. You make some agreements with yourself. going into that situation. And one of them is, I think I knew at that point that it wasn't fair, but that first universal truth that has showed up through all the, I'm lucky enough that Commander Ledford pulled me into his Code of the Warrior class, and I get to hear all these ancient philosophies about what it means to be a warrior and what it means to fight. And the first universal truth in all of these philosophies is that life is suffering. And it's true, because it's not fair. It wasn't fair. It still wasn't. But it also didn't matter for what I had to do. There was being in a leadership position, you don't have a choice. And I got up, despite the fact that I had legitimate brain damage from getting blown up twice in that one day. I got up the next morning and I went on a patrol with my Marines. And it's got to get done. You can't show you're afraid. And that old adage about never let them see you sweat, that's also true. And that was my first thought on it. But then over the course of that, to again echo what the Dept said when he gave his intro speech, it's not that singular event. I think anybody can kind of get up after getting hit once. It's, can you continue to do that over the course of 6 or 7 months? And it's more than that, because eventually we started to lose Marines and we started to have people get evac'd, and I lost my toughest squad leader, toughest. The man never showed any emotion, and I never really even knew he liked me until we were in a gunfight, and it was like the whole world just kind of blew up around me, because there was a machine gun trained on my position, and we were in a wadi, and dirt going up everywhere and water going up everywhere, and Maine thought I had been killed. He thought I had been hit because he couldn't see me anymore through all the dust and everything else going on. And he charged into that situation, and he ran into me, like as I was like ducked down, and he ran into me with his chest hit my back. And he said, "You all right?" I said, "Yeah, I'm good." And I looked up at him like in a gunfight. I said, "I knew you loved me." Yeah. But he was a tough human being. He was the closest model I had to a centurion in that unit. Like, rock solid disciplinarian and a true war fighter. And he got hit and sent home. He got hit and sent back once, and then got hit and sent home after that. Almost lost his foot. I had another squad leader get shot in the head and lived through it. I had a Marine get shot in the head, lived through it. Another Marine get shot in the head, that killed him. I had a really rock-solid Marine get killed by an IED, and these things start to stack up, and you start to see little cracks in your people. And I won't go too deep into all of the point-by-point lessons that I have. I think those will probably eventually come out, but your job, more than anything else as a platoon commander and as a leader, or in any situation where you're going to need to watch people to see how they do over a long span of time, is really just, it's one of the oldest rules out there, and it's just pay attention. It's just to pay attention. That's it. Be present and pay attention. And I think once you know who your people are and you can start to see these little cracks in their character and their composure, that's when you have to start to, like I said, pay attention, apply a little more attention or pressure if you have to. So that's combat resilience. I'm also a father, husband, have been for 14 years, and stacking those things on top of each other. If the last point for my story, I guess, I wasn't really sure what I was going to talk about when I came up here, is that some kind of seeking of balance is difficult. It's not easy, and I'm often weary of offering advice that I'm not able to follow myself, but when you're at work, be at work, and when you're at home, be at home as best as you can. But that's tough, and I think the last piece of advice here is, because these two things blend very, very tightly for me. I love being a Marine officer, and I love being a father, and I love being a husband, and they will often be in conflict with each other. So I guess my last piece of advice would just be careful who you take with you, because it's going to be hard. My wife has had to, she's like the Atlas character holding the globe on her back all by herself very, very often, and very, very, very frequently. And she carries a heavy load, so I'm very lucky, and I'm very proud to be with her, because she's She's a good woman. My Marine joke for her is that I always call her a good piece of gear, and she is.
You made sure she was watching the live stream.
She knows. Okay. She's heard me say that before. We're tracking. But, so that's it. That's kind of my story, I guess. So thanks, Kyle.
Thank you. Major Cook.
Awesome. Can you hear me? Okay, great. So first of all, thank you so much for having me here. I really appreciate it. You know, I like the Daunt said, I still get nervous when I speak in front of crowds, but the Naval Academy is a little bit different. They're kind of like that aunt that like soups you up on Facebook for me, right? Like that always comments like, "This is my hero," or, you know, shouts you out on your birthday, and all of our friends do too. That's the Naval Academy to me, you know, with my face in the visitor center, my flight suits in the museum. They nominate me for the, 50 most influential grads. So coming back here is like hanging out with that cool aunt on Facebook. So thank you for having me and making it so welcoming to come home. And I also don't know how I'm up here with these two warriors. Really, really impressive careers. I'm really humbled to be included with you two. So thank you for that. And so I'll start that, you guys kind of heard my path here. I lived a privileged life growing up, I would say. My dad was a Naval Academy grad. My brother's a Naval Academy grad. My uncle is a Naval Academy grad. And while I competed in swimming growing up, I swam here for 2 years until I got cut, so that sucked. But I would say I didn't struggle. And any struggles that my parents had, they never let me and my brother see, right? And so I lived this pretty easy life. I came to the Naval Academy. I got VJEP, so while it was challenging here, it wasn't that hard for me. And I'm not trying to sound like, I'm not trying to sound like that, but I didn't face the adversity that I probably should have to prepare me for what I was about to do when I put on this uniform. And I would say I got to flight school, and that was the first time that I struggled. Not because I wasn't a good pilot, not because I didn't put in my time, but it was a whole new world for me. I was no longer in the comfort of being told what to do every day like I was here and at TBS. I was being an adult at the same time that I was trying to fly this airplane that has an ejection seat and moves at 240 knots, right? So I definitely struggled there, but I used that adversity, I used that struggle to learn. I took things away from every flight. I failed 2 flights, which I told one of the midshipmen here. I failed 2 flights in flight school. If I had failed a third, I would have been washed out of the program, and then I became a Blue Angel, so that's pretty cool. So if you struggle in flight school, it's not the end of the world. You can overcome it, right? And so I took those lessons learned, and instead of throwing myself a pity party and saying, oh my God, this isn't for me, I'm never going to get my wings, it was, what did I do wrong? How can I improve the next time? And if you can use failure, if you can use struggle, if you can use adversity as a way of learning, then you will always come out the other side of those dark times or those struggles a better person. And so got through flight school, got my wings obviously, went to VMGR 252. I feel like we have very similar careers, except I was above you while you were on the ground. And so I was like a couple months behind him at TBS, so he was getting cold. I was getting the prickly heat rash, trying to get to Rifle Week. But in Afghanistan, I moved people a lot to Dwyer, so I've been there multiple times. And Afghanistan, so my path to Afghanistan was not known. So I show up at VMGR 252, and I had been through the Naval Academy. I did VJEP, so I had another year there. Then I went to TBS. Then I got my wings, and so it took me like 7 years to get to this mythical fleet, right? So I'm finally there at VMGR 252, and I'm a meat eater, right? Just like he said, it was Afghanistan and Iraq were full blown when I show up at my first squadron. And I was like, I want to lead Marines, right? That's what I want to do. I want to show up at my squadron. I want to lead Marines. And so when you check in, they assign you your ground job. So not only are you a pilot, but you also have a ground job. And you want to go downstairs. That's what we refer to as maintenance, because there you have shops full of Marines, whether that's flight equipment, the crewmaster's shop, engines, power line, whatever. you want to go downstairs and lead a shop of Marines so that you can actually get your leadership experience with them. If you go upstairs, that's like safety, operations, not a lot of enlisted up there. And so you're like, I want to go downstairs. So I show up, and before I even get to say where I want to go, my CO is like, you're going to be the adjutant. And so for those of you that know what an adjutant is, like, it's a glorified secretary, which I'm not saying anything against secretaries. They're absolutely important, and there are so many COs, and even in my current job, that could not function without an executive assistant or a secretary. But that's not why I joined the Marine Corps, right? So I was freaking pissed, and I knew the reason that and just from some of the comments he made me the secretary because they wanted a friendly female face when someone walked into the squadron. And so I was like freaking livid, right? Like, just because I'm a girl, you're going to give me this job? And so I was mad. But you know what? I could have sat there and been pissed, and I could have thrown myself a pity party, which I'll say I definitely did for like 5 minutes. I threw myself a pity party. But then I was like, you know what? I'm going to do my damnedest. I'm going to be the best freaking adjutant this dude's ever seen, right? And so I made awesome coffee by the end of it. I made really awesome coffee. I did really well on our IG inspections because, I got our mail shop underway. I got our voting program good. I got our suicide prevention program on lock, and I was really proud of myself, right? And so 6 months later, I had built this reputation not only in the plane but on the ground of being, reliable, being a good Marine. And so 6 months later, we're coming up I get a new job right now, and I'm like, oh, I'm going to maintenance now. I did so good at that other one. I'm going to maintenance. I get to lead Marines, right? And we have these things, or used to have these things in the Marine Corps called family readiness officers, and they are civilians that are the link between the families back home and the Marines that are deployed. So let's say your bank card gets frozen and they can't get a hold of their spouse who's deployed. They go to the FRO, Family Readiness Officer, and they can help facilitate. And they're usually a civilian. Well, our FRO was starting to write herself checks from squadron funds. So obviously highly illegal, she gets fired, all of this. So now we have multiple detachments deployed, and my CO, it takes a lot of red tape to hire I don't have to tell people here, it takes a lot of red tape to hire a civilian to work for the military, right? So trying to hire somebody new when we had a definite need quickly, the CO needed to find somebody to fill that spot. Guess who it was, right? You can see where this is going, right? And his response to why he picked me was, well, most of the spouses are women, so they'll relate to you. Right? So now I'm even more pissed. This is now 2 jobs in a row where I went from being the adjutant and now I'm to the family readiness officer. And the family readiness officer, though important, did a lot of things like planning homecomings, planning the Christmas party, planning the ice cream social, planning the Easter party. And I went from a secretary to a party planner, right? And so this is not why I joined the Marine Corps. And I was so mad. Again, could have thrown myself a pity party, which I did for 5 minutes, right? And then I was like, I'm going to be the best damn party planner that I can be. Those kids are going to have like every freaking flavor of ice cream. That bounce house is going to be in place 2 hours before the party, right? And so I put my head down and I did the best that I could while also, focusing on my flying skills. So then fast forward another 6 months, detachment's supposed to push out to Afghanistan. I was not on this detachment. I was not supposed to go. And I was really bummed about that because, again, I spent 7 years here about this mythical fleet, and I want to take the fight to the enemy, right? And I was not going to be allowed to. I was not selected for that deployment. Well, one of our pilots popped with a heart murmur, couldn't go, 6 weeks prior to pushing out. For those of you that are pilots, we do these things called workups. So workups generally take about 6 months where we practice all of the skills that we'll be using in country before we go, because you don't want to be dropping people out the back. You don't want to be shooting a loom. You don't want to be shooting missiles when you're getting shot at, right? That's for the first time. You want to be able to do it down packed when there's nobody shooting at you first. So this workup generally takes 6 months to do. And we had 6 weeks now to find a replacement pilot. And when they asked my CO who they want to replace him, without missing a beat, he said Katie. And obviously that's my first name. Katie, me. Because he had seen that I was hyper-organized, I was dedicated, I was driven, and I was going to take these situations that maybe weren't ideal, and I was still going to excel at them. And so while those situations were not the adversity that I was going to face later on in my career, they helped build that path. And I think what the major said was really key is like you can get knocked down and stand up once, but it's that path that you're doing throughout your life. And so you maybe don't even realize it, right? If you make the choice to go to King Hall and have a salad rather than order a pizza, that is a small choice that you're making to make the quote unquote harder decision, right? It's not the easy one, it's the harder decision. And if you make that in your mind continuously, I'm going to make the harder decision. I'm going to make the better decision for me. I'm going to make the decision that leads to long-term growth rather than short-term satisfaction. That will eventually help you when you reach these dark times and these hard times. And I will say, you know, when I came back from Afghanistan, you know, it was a weird time for me. Unlike him, the enemy didn't have a face for me. You know, I was at 13,000 feet shooting them every day. And so I could hear the rounds tick, tick, tick on the radio when you know, a JTAC was calling me to shoot for him. And then I would hear okay, they're neutralized or whatever, but the enemy didn't have a face. And so it was this weird feeling of like, I'm taking a life from someone that a lot of times if I was doing JPEL missions, which are, you know, VIP or high value target missions, when I was doing JPEL missions, you're taking the word of a intel officer saying this is a bad guy, and you shoot him, whether you see him doing something bad or not, right? And so that can be, it can mess with your mind a little bit, you know, that I don't know if this is a bad guy or not. I have to trust the intel that this is a bad guy. And so when I came back from Afghanistan, I'll tell you, like, I was, there were some unhealthy habits. I started drinking a lot. I wasn't sleeping. And unfortunately, my unit didn't recognize it because 3 months later, they offered another deployment and I jumped on that grenade. And I was like, I want to go. And I pushed out on a second deployment when I was not in a healthy place. And I think that's another thing that really touches on what the major said, that you have to pay attention. As a leader, you have to pay attention to those that you are leading. You should know them well enough that you know when they're not healthy, right? When they are struggling with combat stress or PTSD or TBIs or whatever it is, you need to notice and you need to get them the help because you need to pay attention. And so went on my second deployment. Luckily, that kept me away from the booze, right? Because I was now in I was in Uganda waiting to evacuate the embassy to South Sudan. So luckily I couldn't do much unhealthy stuff there, but I was alone. I sequestered myself in my room a lot, and I was not dealing with some of the things that I had seen in Afghanistan. And I think that the importance of this whole conference of building resiliency is important, but there is also a point where you can only build resiliency so much and you need to reach out to those that can help you professionally, right? And I didn't realize that until I got back from my second deployment and I, you know, started counseling and stuff like that. And I thought that was a really important lesson for me because fast forward now, and I'm sorry if I'm talking way too long, but I'm fast forward to when I was on the Blue Angels, and unfortunately when I was on there, I lost a very good friend in a plane crash, Captain Jeff Coos. And just like the major said, I unfortunately had to quite literally pick up my friend and pieces of his airplane. And during that time, I kept telling myself, like, nope, you're fine. You've seen this shit in Afghanistan. You're fine. You'll get through this. This is fine. This is fine. This is fine. And it wasn't until it was not fine. I wasn't sleeping. I was in a really unhealthy place. And it took my friends being like, Katie, this is not you. You're underperforming. You're not focused. You're not performing the way that you need to. You're not being the loving, happy person that you are. And so I went and got some more counseling, as did many people on the team with us. And I would say we came out a stronger, better team. The loss of Jeff is profound, and I still feel it every day. But instead of it being a sad thing, instead of it being something that I will forever miss him, and mourn him. Now I'm trying to turn it into, I'm going to live my life in the best way possible to honor him. I'm going to take lessons from him and from his life, and I'm going to apply those to my leadership style. And I'm going to use those. And so again, coming full circle now of if you can take hard times and learn lessons from them, even the worst, darkest, terrible times, and take lessons and learn from them and grow, you will be a better version of yourself. And so I'll conclude with, people always ask me, how do you become a Blue Angel? What is the advice that you give to people? And I think it applies here, and that is, calm seas don't make a skilled sailor, right? It's not the easy times in your life. It's not the smooth sailing when everything's going your way, when you're going to be, honor grad or whatever it is. It's not the easy times. It's those hard times. It's the dark times. It's the friction. It's the adversity. It's the failure. And it is that time that you take those lessons, imbue them into your soul, and become a better person, a better wife, a better mother, a better leader, a better Marine, a better sailor, whatever it is. Take the adversity and see it as a learning point, and you will be a better person for it. So.
Thank you so much for all of your insights. One thing I've been learning, the last panelist actually also mentioned the importance of friends, communities, and mentors. It's not just about being tough yourself, but about having those people around you to increase your resiliency as well, which kind of leads into the first question, which is, over the course of your career, how has your perception of what resilience means changed? And any order, just whenever you think of something.
I will say that I now think of the brain as a muscle, while before I didn't. So think of like the splits, right? If you want to do the splits and you practice every day doing the splits, eventually you'll be able to do it. And if you are trying to hop the wall and make it in time for taps and you fell in the split position, you wouldn't hurt yourself that bad, right? Because you trained for it. But if you had never done the splits and you jump the wall and you land in that position, I guarantee you're going to tear something, right? It's not going to be good. But, and it's the same thing for your brain, right? If you are training it, you're pushing yourself, challenging yourself, trying to build this resiliency. When you get into a position where you're challenged, or you're in a dark time, or you lose somebody, or you're in a position, you trained your brain to adapt, to stretch, just like you did with the splits, right? And if you don't do that, if you don't push yourself, and all of a sudden now you're forced with this traumatic experience, your brain is not going to respond the way that a resilient brain will. And so I think that's kind of how I view it now. Is before I thought, oh, I can muscle through anything, and that's not true. You need to train your brain just as you train a muscle.
So I initially thought of it as very much go through this experience, achieve this skill, you are now more resilient. And it was always tied to some kind of achievement in my mind. Like in order to become more resilient, you had to accomplish more. But I now, as a 30, what year is it, 2022? So 36 right now. I have to do the math at this point. But as a 36-year-old, I now think to myself that that's not correct. What I really think now is, I gave a speech earlier this year about the core values for the Marine Corps and the Navy, and I had a focus on commitment, and I honed in on Albert Camus' book, The Myth of Sisyphus, and the final story in that book is about Sisyphus and how he's the ancient mythical deity who has to push the rock to the top of the hill and then it falls back down. There's no way for it to settle on the top of the hill. And what I discovered through Camus' writing was one of the key lines towards the end of the book. The first part of it is really dense, but the last chapter is really coherent. And one of the things he says is, I have to imagine that Sisyphus was happy. In order to go through these events in life, in order to deal with this kind of adversity you're going to face in your career going forward, and I'm mostly speaking to the midshipmen at this point, obviously, but things will just not go your way sometimes. It's very true that you can do everything right and still fail. It's not directly tied to accomplishment. What I now think of resilience as kind of what General Mattis says, which is fighting with a happy heart. He talks about that in Call Sign Chaos extensively. And I think what he means by that is the struggle is the goal. Like, like Katie said, you don't build a good sailor in calm seas. You can't build muscles of resilience. And again, like I think of the brain and obviously the heart and maybe the soul is some kind of muscle. Unless you give clear repetitions in an attempt to build things, and you don't necessarily tie it to succeeding, can you learn lessons even in failure? I mean, God, we're really negative creatures in general. Those are the situations that stick out in our mind more than anything else, is when we punt something into the stands as opposed to really win. Like when I look back on my Marine Corps career or my wrestling career, it wasn't the matches or the firefights that we won. It was the ones where things didn't go well. Those are the ones that I gleaned the most lessons from. But that's it. Like, I have to imagine that Sisyphus was happy. The struggle is the goal. That's where resilience is built. It's not tied to accomplishment. So that's my thoughts on that.
Originally, I didn't think much about it. I just did, if something was hard, I just leaned into it a little bit harder through failures. Over the time, especially since I've been here, my academic research has been focused on resilience in particular, resilience, grit, hardiness, and mindfulness. And in doing that, we've been able to explore through my research team a little bit about what it's made of. And so there are really 5 pillars of resilience. And we've talked a little bit about, through our stories and what we've discussed so far, we've hit on some of these key aspects already. The 5 pillars are basically meaning and purpose, having something that you have a commitment to, a fire in your gut that you want to, continue doing, that makes you lean in harder. Mindfulness, there's a whole, gazillions of books out there now and apps and exercises on mindfulness. That's all connected to it as well. There is your physical health, and Katie was mentioning about not being healthy. This happens in times of crisis. The things that you stop doing are working out, you get poor sleep, and you eat horribly. You eat junk food, and those 3 things in particular begin this downward spiral with your physical health. And so it's incredibly important to lean into those as well, and to eat well, do whatever you can to be able to sleep at night and maintain your physical health, working out and exercising. And then finally, your mental health there's a direct connection between your mental health and your physical health. It's a solid line. It's not a dotted line. They are one and the same. They're connected. In your physical health, if that is maintained, then your mental health has a greater propensity to also be in a better state and be healthy as well. And then the final thing is social support. You have to have a network around you that can understand when you're going through that struggle, and whatever it is, just give you a look, a small, pat on the back, like, hey, you got this. Whatever it is, they have to say to get you moving again. But that's the 5th and, equally as important aspect of resilience. So those 5 things in particular are, what I've learned over the years through experiences. Now on the academic side, doing research, pulling resilience apart and seeing, the pieces of it has been pretty fascinating to me. And it's kind of the central piece of the research that I'm doing currently with my team.
Thank you. So a lot of times things take us by surprise, and those are feelings of adversity. We talked about getting ambushed and getting off the X with Lieutenant Redmond, but sometimes you have a moment of adversity that you know is coming, whether it's waiting for a certain mission or a test that's coming up. So how do you, number one, get through those times with a solid mental state in order to optimize your performance once you get there?
In aviation, we really preach this idea of compartmentalization. And so when I knew I was about to fly a mission where we were going to be shooting, or we were going to be on these JPL missions that I mentioned earlier, or we were quite literally running to the airplane to start it up because there was a tick or a troops in contact, I at the same time while I was in Afghanistan, I was getting a divorce from my first husband. So, I was going through some crazy stuff. And I had to purposefully, as soon as I stepped foot in that airplane, all of that other stuff goes away. You have to put it in a box and put it away. Because the most important thing right now is what is inside this airplane and those Marine sailors, airmen, soldiers on the ground, right? That's what I had to focus on. And so a lot of times life is not simple. And just as the Major said earlier, it starts to stack on top of each other for some reason. When you have a hardship, generally 4, 5, 6, 7 hardships happen all at once. And you have to be able to put those in a box, put it away, and focus on the mission at hand. And so compartmentalization is something that I truly took with me when I would step in the airplane in Afghanistan.
So for me, it's training, period. And training, as the Marine Corps' Bible, MCDP1 Warfighting, discusses, is composed of, it doesn't say this explicitly, but what I've gleaned from it in my Marine Corps career is your training must compose of 3 things. It must be tough, it must be realistic, and it must be competitive. I have a similar set of rules for resilience as Commander Ledford here has outlined, but one of the ones that's a little bit different, it probably ties to the physical and mental health one he talked about, which was, one of my rules is essentially just to seek adversity. There's no real difference in the other rules except for that one, and it's just to seek adversity. And what I mean by that is, in training, you must find ways to have that conversation with that little voice in your head that says, like, hey, you can stop. Hey, you can quit. Like, do one less rep. Nobody will ever know. You must find ways to have a conversation with that little voice inside. For some people, it's different things. As a wrestler, for me, it's not being dehydrated or being hungry. For something, the people who get real hangry, those are the folks who should skip a few meals and then have a discussion with themselves. That's their thing. For some people, it's sleep. If you miss a night or you miss a full night's sleep and you pull a Buddy the Elf and get a full 45 minutes, you are going to be in trouble, and maybe that will make you have that confrontation with yourself. For me, for Dave Emison, the moments I have those conversations with myself is when I'm cold. I don't like being cold. I've been in infantry. I went through TBS in the cold. I went through IOC in the cold. I slept on the ground, snuggled up against my platoon sergeant and my radio operator in Afghanistan because it was cold. And every time somebody's leg would fall asleep, we only inserted with poncho liners and tarps because our backpacks only had ammo, water, and batteries, and that's it. And every time somebody's leg would fall asleep, all 3 of us bump one of the other, and we'd all 3 turn over to the other direction so the other person's leg could wake up. I've been cold, I feel like, most of my Marine Corps career, and I still don't enjoy it. So that's it. Find ways to have that conversation with yourself through adverse positions, and then the realistic portion of the combat training that has to be relevant for not just you, but for your Marines. You can go real hard into one direction that has no relevancy to your mission. And then competitive. You have to find a way for your Marines to say, your Marines or sailors to say, I'm the best, right? Or in some cases, that guy's the worst. That is also true. Both have their own benefits. So that's it for me, I guess.
I'd agree. I think the self-growth, stretching yourself, finding ways, folks ask me quite a bit if they want to go SEALs, what can I do, what books should I read, and, podcasts should I listen to, or movies should I watch, and really it's each day there are opportunities every day to stretch yourself, to do something that's a little bit uncomfortable, that a little bit challenges you in a little way. Every day there are those opportunities. And by capitalizing on those opportunities every day, you can start building the muscle group that we're talking about. And it is just like going to the gym. It is very hard to expect that if you have not hit the gym for years, and it comes time to do, a serious lift, that you're going to do well. And it applies mentally as well with resilience, that if you are not challenging yourself, and whatever that is, if it's, as Katie was mentioning, going for the salad instead of the pizza, that's a little micro opportunity that happens in a day where you're like, yeah, I'm not doing that. And your week now is built up on those small events. Those are the things that you can do that far exceeds any book that you're going to read or Jocko podcast or that you're going to listen to, whatever it is. And I love Jocko. We deploy together. But, those are the things that you have to do each day in your life. Not just reading or listening to it, but actually doing it and exercising that brain function just in the same way that you would be, you hit the gym.
So one thing we're interested in at the leadership conference here is the theme, resilience, personal resilience, but also how do you create a resilient team? Outside of just your own personal resilience, have you gained any principles over your career on how to build team resilience?
I think it kind of goes exactly what the major said about training, right? All of you probably have a friend or a couple friends from plebe summer, right? Because you all went through the suck together, right? And that is what I would say helps, and that is the importance of field training, I would say. Yes, you need to learn the skills, absolutely. You're in the field to learn the skills, but you're also in the field to build that resiliency together, to build that bond together, to build that morale together. And that only happens, I would say, to the extent that you need it in combat in a simulated environment, as the major said. So I think making it hurt in the field is probably one of the best ways to bond your team.
So I guess principles, and I don't know if I knew these at the time, but it was something I definitely tried to focus on. It was very similar to what Commander Ledford talked about earlier, and I'll give you mine now because it's kind of in line with what Kyle asked here. The first one, like you talked about, is to find your purpose or find, and if you apply that to a team writ large, it's what's the mission, and how do you tie that together? And I don't know, personally and as a unit. Personally, David Brooks talks about this in his newest book. It's called The Second Mountain. I'd highly recommend it. But if you can find those three things in your life that you can draw a straight line through, like that's probably where your purpose is. For me, it's been obviously working with Marines in a leadership capacity, mentoring midshipmen, teaching, all those things. Like those things all line up very easily for me. So I made the decision very recently to just stay in the Marine Corps and stay the course because this is where I'm best. But as a unit, it's unify them behind that mission. The second one, like we talked about, was to seek adversity. Just like we said earlier, no change to that one, especially the training aspect. The third one is applied to a unit level, is some kind of after action. You must review what you've done, whether that's through a written report or it's through really just sitting around in a school circle. I mean, most human knowledge has been passed back and forth around a campfire. So if you have a chance to do a warrior night and sit around a campfire and discuss how you guys are doing and what you can do better going forward, I highly recommend that situation, or in a formalized setting like an after action. If you go to these large training environments like ITX or Mountain X or whatever else there is out there, they'll put all your shortfalls up on a screen behind you and tell you where you're all jacked up. So but it's tough when it comes from somebody else, because if somebody else is telling you you're all jacked up, they're using you phrases, you're gonna be like, how does this guy know what's good for me? But if it's your platoon commander, if it's the people inside of your unit who are saying, hey, I think we need to do these things better, that's super valuable. And then I guess the last one is, how do you develop good teams? And we've hit on this theme earlier, but the fourth rule for me is to develop social networks that really matter. There's all kinds of social networks out there right now who are, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but they might be trying to drive us further apart from each other. But that's been my thought on these social instruments that everybody has in their internet-connected smart devices in their pockets. They're not making us closer together. Despite the fact that we're more connected than we've ever been, we're not closer than we've ever been. We're way further away from it than maybe ever, in a long, long time at least. We're not actively at war against each other in this country, but it's the trust levels have fallen across the board in the government, in each other, in ourselves. It's not good right now. So how do you do that? Well, where'd your unit come from? What have they done before you? I was lucky enough to be a platoon commander in 1st Battalion, 6th Marines. And we're 6th Marines is one of the only 2 units in the Marine Corps that gets to wear the French Fourragère, which, you know, that goes all the way back to World War I, and there's a legacy. And how do you build upon the people who came in front of you? Because T.R. Fehrenbach talks about this a lot in this kind of war, which is you're following in the footsteps of giants as a leader in whatever unit you're in, whatever ship you go to, whatever wing you end up in. There's all kinds of people who have come before you and done amazing, heroic things, who were, here's a dirty little secret, normal people just like you, but they were put in extraordinary circumstances and rose to the occasion. So tell those stories so that people have an image in their mind of what not only they are capable of, but what a unit that is on the same page is capable of together. So that's it. Mission focused, seeking adversity, going through some kind of introspective exercise, whether that's an after action or something along those lines, and then finally build things that allow for some kind of social cohesion within your unit. That's the way you build a resilient unit, in my mind.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add to that is the understanding your people. Everyone is going to be different in how they handle challenges, stress, adversity. So as a leader, you have to know your people. You have to know what they find difficult, what comes easy to them, where they're struggling, if they're struggling. And so the depth of your knowledge of your own people is going to allow you to have this discussion where you can be supportive but also pushing, right? Because you want to find that sweet spot where you're challenging them and you're trying to get them to stretch into something that they can accomplish only through, really stretching themselves and reaching out. But you also want to be supportive as well. And you want to foster that, that network, that support network within your organization. And the only way to do that is you have to have a deep understanding of who they are and what they're about. So as a leader, it's a tireless job because there is just not enough time in the day. There aren't enough hours in the day for you to do all of it. To do your job, to do your mission, answer to your bosses, pass down these orders, get your people moving, and then everything else that you should be doing as a leader and investing in all of them, understanding who they are, talking to them, counseling, documenting things, and then having these discussions like, what are their goals for the year? What do they want to get out of the military? What do they want to get out of life? So only by understanding that can you really develop this resilience within your team. And the first step of that, I think, is really understanding your people at a very deep level. And it's challenging to do. It takes a lot of time and effort. So the only thing I would add.
Thank you. So if anybody has questions, you guys can start to queue up. We're going to do one more question for the panel, and then we'll take questions from the audience. So we have learned a lot now about resilience before combat and then during the moment of adversity. But we're also interested in getting through the fight. What is your experience with PTSD and moral injury and how to properly address it?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think this is one thing I've just thought about recently in the last couple months. I never thought that any of my experiences in Iraq or Afghanistan affected me. And I think what I've learned really over the last couple months was that it probably is all there, and it depends on individuals on when that comes out. But the certainty I've kind of learned in the last several months is actually that it is going to come out. It's going to manifest itself in some way. You can't be human and to go through, the experiences of combat and seeing, friends die, people that you care about deeply, and to see war, up close in that way. You can't go through that as a human and not be affected. And for a long time, I just felt like, I'm good. The training we did was very realistic. It prepared me enough, and I'm fine. Only kind of lately have I just come to terms that, all right, there probably is something there. And the reason why I'm saying a couple months ago is because I think it was, at the beginning of January, we were doing a talk. The midshipmen here at the Naval Academy had to come back and do a, ROM in their rooms. They had to stay in their rooms for the week. And I did a talk at night with them, and I was talking about a member of my platoon who I thought about. He committed suicide in, it was 2001. It was just before everything kicked off. And he was part of my SEAL platoon, and I'd never, it affected me in a certain way, but I never felt like it was something that was very intense to me. And just talking about him, just a couple of weeks ago, it really shook me up, and I had to stop for a little bit and, take a moment. And it kind of dawned on me that, maybe these things, they are still stuffed down there, and some of us are, really good at stuffing that down and compartmentalizing it too well to some degree. But at a certain point, it all, it does come out. And I think the things we've been talking about, especially the social support, the network of friends, that's really what's going to get a lot of that to come out. And eventually, it will come out. It may take months, it may take years, even decades sometimes, but it's going to come out. And so that's something that I found has been beneficial for me.
So when Afghanistan fell apart, the bottom fell out for me a little bit. I thought for a long time, same thing, right? I'm fine, this is fine, everything's fine. You've all seen the meme with the dog in the burning room, right? And Lauren sent me one of those actually this week, talking about her knee injury. Like, this is fine, everything's fine. When Afghanistan fell apart, there's those defining moments in your life where you realize that, like, I have to change something. This is not this. I don't feel like this is the correct thing for me. And since I've been at the Naval Academy, there's been a couple, because this place has been so phenomenal for me in so many ways. And I hope that I've left. This is my last 6 months here, and I hope I've left an impact on some folks here in the same way that all you guys have really left an impact on me. I can't begin to express how grateful I have been to be here, and working with Commander Ledford like I have over the last few years, that's one of the defining mentors in my life, if I could tell you. And I'm truly lucky to be here with you, despite the fact that the Marine Corps was your second choice. But when Afghanistan fell apart, he and I ran into each other in the hallway, and there was just this utter feeling of just devastation. And we may or may not have welled up and then done push-ups, but it was hard, and I couldn't. He and I, we've talked about this in Code of the Warrior, and he and I are upset about it, but for different reasons. And it took me a little while to understand what happened there and why it hit me so hard. But the lesson I eventually gleaned from it was that I don't think anybody in this room would argue the fact that I think what we're experiencing right now as just a generation writ large, maybe my generation and yours, is there's a, if you look outside of the Naval Academy, the people who don't have a guaranteed job when they're going to leave college, there's a crisis of meaning. There's a crisis of purpose. And despite how I feel about the mission in Afghanistan or what they wanted us to do or how we fought it or what kind of moral injury you might glean from that situation, what I eventually came to the conclusion on was there's a whole lot of young men and women in this country who got to experience that rite of passage that moral test as Marines, sailors, airmen, soldiers to a lesser extent, but just kidding. I love the Army. They all got to experience something that they never would have experienced otherwise. Now, I won't just sit up here and blanketedly, recommend going to war in order to become a man or a woman of value in your society, but that was a side effect of it, and it did make me feel a little bit better when I thought about the men in my platoon who I deployed to Afghanistan with and how they were better men than they would have been otherwise. So in terms of the takeaways from that whole situation and what moral injury I might have dealt with in that, I struggle with there's really two ways to look at it. Moral injuries, you can think of the things that took place during some of the more disgusting incidents in American history, like the massacre at My Lai, where everybody clicked off safe and killed everybody. Women, children, old men, young men, everybody was a target. That causes a specific kind of moral injury. The second kind of moral injury is the one that I think most of my generation, if they have been honest with themselves and confronted themselves with this at this point, is the one where you pull back. When you pull back on the collar and you say, hey, whoa, easy, let's think about this a little bit, and then somebody gets hurt. Somebody you care about, one of the Marines that you have put blood, sweat, and tears into, gets killed because you or your unit showed restraint under your orders. That's a separate side of it. So how have I dealt with it? I don't know. The bottom has only recently started to come back in, I feel like. But I was dealing with stress differently, really just in the last few months. Like I don't handle my stress the same way I used to. I don't sleep the same way I used to. I won't lie and say that occasionally, like my wife and my kids are on the receiving end of what is a shorter temper than normal. So, introspection, the things we talked about, like an individual after-action report, trying to understand how you're acting and why you're acting that way. That is usually the best way for me to kind of move past this stuff. And for me, really, like I might be a little bit too lazy or too busy to sit down and write, but being able to talk and being able to speak, that makes a big difference for me. So the social network thing, being able to talk to like-minded individuals like Commander Ledford or even other-minded individuals, that helps too, getting a different perspective. But for me, it's been guys like this, guys like Major Mike Copa, who I can come to, shut the door, and be like, and just click off safe, go straight from semi to burst, and explain what's going on in my mind and in my heart. So again, friends, and obviously I'd be remiss with that if I didn't mention my main support network. Again, she loves these little nicknames I have for her, but my rear area commander, my wife, she's been the one that I've leaned on the heaviest. She knows my heart, she knows me well, and I'm lucky to have her because she understands me. So
I want to be friends with your wife.
She's awesome.
So I'll just quickly, I alluded to it earlier. I handled my combat stress poorly, and I also handled it properly, right? And so I saw both sides of the coin of doing it in an unhealthy way and doing it in a healthy way. And I would say because I handled my stress in a healthy way eventually, it took me a while to get there, but handled it in a healthy way eventually, when everything was kicking off or falling apart in Afghanistan, I felt the feelings that everyone was feeling, but I had healthy coping mechanisms that helped me get through it. My husband, also Blue Angel pilot, JTAC on the ground with 2-2 in Helmand, he, I would say, did not handle the fallout from Afghanistan as well. He had the anger and everything that he was working through. And so I would say that, a lot of people, just as the commander said, get this idea in their head of, I'm fine. I went through all this traumatic stuff, but I'm fine. It was the training that was good. I promise you there is something in there that needs help. There's even if it's a small amount of help that just needs to talk with friends or needs to talk with a counselor, or to the far side of things needs inpatient treatment. There's something that you can heal in there if you have experienced something traumatic. And again, it can be something simple as just talking to a friend about it. I will say, going back again to what the commander said, knowing your people is so important. If you recognize that someone is acting in a different way coming back from a traumatic experience, and it could be COVID. COVID could be traumatic. Losing someone to COVID, right? Being plugged in and saying this person is isolating themselves. They're eating worse. They're not working out anymore. They have a change of their personality. You as a leader need to be tuned into that. You need to know them well enough that they are being different and pull them in and be like, what's going on? How can I help you? These are the resources that you have. I think that's really, really, really important, and it only comes with time and getting to know your people so well that you can tune into those examples, and it can save their life. If just asking the question, are you okay, can literally save their life. And that's up to you as a leader to build that trust.
So I think we only have time for 2 questions. So the front person at East Mike, I'm sorry, a little behind on time.
Well,
but
I know I'll hang out a little bit afterwards if people want to come up and talk.
all right, so go ahead.
Good morning, Marine Officer Candidate Karina Wolf, representing Bob Jones University and OST Charlotte. Specifically, 2 quick questions for the ma'am. First of all, if you had a choice, why did you choose to fly Big Albert? And secondly, how would you react or deal with parents or individuals who don't believe females specifically should be in military aviation?
So Fat Albert, yes, she's my girl. The reason that I chose to fly her, honestly, at the very beginning when I was first applying for the team is because I wanted to fly a plane in a manner that could get my wings taken away in any other situation, right? But I got a free pass with the Blues. As long as it's painted blue and gold, I could do whatever the heck I wanted with that airplane. That was my first inspiration behind it, you know, and when I was applying for the team and you know, there's a whole long application process. It's like getting into the Naval Academy with like freaking nominations and stuff. I would say I was sitting at the table in our ready room, and there were 16 people around me, and I was at the end, and they purposely will like lower the chair, like so you walk in and you're like this at the table, right? So I'm sitting there like this, and they asked me like, how would you handle being the first female pilot on the team? And I said, I didn't know I was. And I really think that's the reason that I got the job, is because I did not go there to be like, make it the Katie show. I mean, part of it turned into that because I got featured on all these TV shows and stuff that was not my intention. I joined the Marine Corps to support those men and women on the ground, and I joined the Blue Angels because I wanted to fly the crap out of an airplane, right? And it just so happened that it spun out of control. But I would say, when it comes to, I did have those several times on Crowdline. I remember like a little boy sitting there, women can't be pilots, girls can't be pilots. How are you flying a plane, you know? And it was really cool to put a face in a quite literally very flashy uniform in front of them to say like, yes, women can be Marines. Yes, women can be pilots. Yes, they can be Blue Angels if they put their mind to it, right? And so those that say women can't be in aviation, you know, I would tell them to go Google YouTube and just type in my name because I flew the crap out of that airplane, right?
Yes, ma'am.
So
Thank
prove
you.
them wrong. Yeah, thanks.
Good morning, Midshipman Mays from the Rutgers-Princeton unit, and I am very grateful that each of you came and shared your experiences in your journey to see your dreams come true. And one thing I was curious about was oftentimes something that could end that journey for so many people trying to see their big dreams come true is that loss of hope, a moment where you lose hope and you don't know how to recover from it. And I was curious whether or not at any point in your journeys to see your dreams come true, if you lost hope in a moment, and how did you exercise resilience in that moment to overcome it?
So for me, I touched on it briefly. I actually, when Afghanistan fell apart, I thought very, very heavily about putting in my letter of resignation and just leaving the Marine Corps at large. I was very demoralized. It didn't feel good. Obviously, that's not going to be the case. I accepted orders to Quantico. I'm staying in because it's a phenomenal job. It's a vocation. It's a calling. It's not a job. So it'd be ridiculous to let that go. But in those moments where you get hit hard, that's kind of your question. Like how do you get hit hard, and how do you rebound? Right? Am I right in that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I think it's a little bit easier when you're in charge of something, because it's not about you. That's really my thought process on it. And I've been lucky in that where I've seen folks focus inwardly, and I'm definitely guilty of this from time to time, and throw a, like Katie said, a pity party. Fine, but put a timeline on it, right? If you want to throw a pity party, for some people it's 15 minutes. For some people it's a day. For some people it's a week. But at some point you gotta move on. You gotta get over it, because look, and I've been lucky enough as a Marine officer the whole time I've been in to be always obviously like in leadership positions, and no matter what you're doing, whether I was a recruiter and in charge of multiple candidate pools across multiple different states. I was an OSO for the kids out here who are, midshipmen going through OSTs. And then obviously as a platoon commander or company commander, there's always somebody relying on you. And that weight has always been real for me, and I've always been able to feel that. And also as a husband and father, I can't just go home and punt it. There's no way. Like, Netflix and chill means something very differently for you when you're a father. You can't go home and just sit there. Yeah, you just sit there. You can't veg out and not do anything all day because people are relying on you. You have to, hey, the battery's dead on the car. It's like, oh man, oh, that's my job, right? For me, seeking responsibility has always been a way for me to push through some of those more difficult situations, if that makes sense.
Thank you, sir.
And I'll just add on to it too. Just as what we were saying, when Afghanistan, we withdrew from Afghanistan, just the fact of us bumping into each other in the hallway, that is those moments when you really, see that despair, and it feels like, the candle has gone out. That's where you're going to get it from. You're going to get it from the people around you, and they're going to come to you like, yeah, God, it freaking sucks. It's horrible. But that camaraderie, that shared experience, commiserating together, that's how you recharge and get back on it. And I think everyone does go through that at some point. You do have that feeling at some point. So it is really important to surround yourself with positive individuals who are going to be there. And if you have this inkling that, the fair weather friends who are not going to be around, that you can't count on, life is too short to surround yourself with individuals like that. Go out and, be that person to someone else to determine if they're going to be that person to you. And I think by surrounding yourself with those individuals, that's how you're going to accommodate those moments, because everyone's going to feel them at some point.
Thank you, sir.
Cool.
Yeah, I'll just add that when I failed those 2 flights in flight school and I had one more shot, I called my mom. And had her fly down to Florida, and she made my favorite mac and cheese. And I straight up asked her, will you still, and this is, now I look back at it and I'm being so hyperbolic, but will you still love me if I'm not a pilot? I was a 3rd generation going through flight school there. Would you still be proud of me if I'm not a pilot? And of course she said yes, like any mom. But you surround yourself with that social circle that are real and are going to support you through those dark times, and you need to fortify them with people who are not fair weather, that will be there no matter what, even when you're at your darkest and not in a flashy blue suit, right? So.
Thank you, ma'am.
Would everybody join me in thanking these amazing panelists for their time? And as you walk off the stage, I'll present each of you with a gift on behalf of the Naval Academy Leadership Conference. Thank you. Unfortunately not.